Hello, this is Alan Zimmerman, and the topic of this video is the latest natural disaster information from the National Centers for Environmental Information. If you don't know this, the NCEI, it is the government agency that's responsible for keeping all the historical geophysical data. And among their many databases, they have one that accumulates data on all the natural losses that created $1 billion of loss between 1980 and the present. And it's quite an extensive database. It accumulates data by event and by year and by state. And we and insurance companies find it quite useful in terms of evaluating trends in natural disasters. So with that, let me share my screen and we'll start the presentation. So as I said, the topic of this video is weather and climate disaster information from the NCEI. Um, so if we start by just looking at the data that the agency has from 1980 to 2023, you can see that the data is accumulated for 7 different types of events. And there have been 376 events that caused $1 billion worth of losses, and the losses have accumulated to $2.7 trillion. So, as the chart shows, hurricanes have the largest amount of losses, accounting for 52% of the losses over this period. But the severe storms, the hail, tornado, the various connective storms, have had the most events with 186. That's almost half of the events have been in these severe storms. And as you expect, the hurricanes have much higher amount of losses than hail and tornado storms. So if we look at the trend of the events over this 44-year period, what you can see is that the number of $1 billion loss events has really ramped up, in the last, since last 18 years, particularly since around 2005. And you can see that was because the number of severe storms increased significantly. The box on the right shows that they move up from an average of a little over 1 each year to an average of 8 each year. So there's been a significant increase in the number of events. There also has been an increase, as you expect, in the amount of losses, which is, as this chart shows, have grown at 6% annually over this period. But the amount of losses in any given year are quite variable, driven mainly by whether there's been a big hurricane or not. But the loss trend is fairly significant at 6% annually, and this has been a drag on GDP. As you can see in the box, catastrophes used to average about 32 basis points of GDP, and in the last years it's moved up to 48. So there's been a significant increase in both the number of events and the amount of the losses. When we look across the data by states, you can see it's fairly widespread, but as you would expect, that most of the large states' losses come from hurricanes. In fact, 7 of the top 10 states, the major loss within those states are hurricanes. Only California, where most of the losses come from wildfires, and Iowa and Illinois, which had drought and flood and severe storms, they don't fall into the hurricane category. While we look at the states in the previous chart in total, it's also interesting to look at the data on a per capita basis, because here you get a different picture. Here you can see that if we think of it by population, that the plain states, the middle of the country, becomes much more important. And then you can see some significant changes. California drops out of the top 10. New York and New Jersey are also aren't ranked. Texas, which is the number 1 in terms of losses, falls to number 9 on a per category basis, and Florida falls from 2 to 5. And if you look at who the number 1 ranked state is on this basis, it's Louisiana, because they have both a lot of hurricane losses and a reasonably small population. So if we want to, pursue it by event, let's do the same thing and look at hurricanes. So it's no surprise that the bulk of the states that have the highest hurricane losses are in the southeast. But New York and New Jersey might surprise some people. But here it's mainly because they have fairly major coastal exposures. I mean, all you have to do is think about Hurricane Irene and particularly Hurricane Sandy. So these are the states that have the largest amount of hurricane losses. If you look specifically at the hurricane losses, what you can see is that the bulk of the losses come, as you would expect, from the larger storms. The Category 4 and Category 5 storms, account for 84% of all the hurricane losses accumulated by the agency. And what's fairly clear that if a Category 4 or Category 5 storm is going to make landfall, it almost always will cause a billion-dollar event. And just to look more specifically, we didn't show a chart on this, but that if you look at the total hurricane losses, 68% of the losses come from Gulf hurricanes, and 32% are from the Atlantic. If you look at the dollar amount of the hurricane losses annually, you can see that it really depends on whether or not there is a big one. And so there's 6 years in here where you can see that the losses really ramp up from some of the bigger hurricanes. So if we follow the same logic and look at the severe storms, what you can see is that this is mainly a center of the country event kind of thing, and that you can see that the severe storms, as you expect, sort of run through Tornado Alley and maybe to a little bit of the east. But there's some interesting characteristics with these storms that the data show, which is quite interesting. And certainly insurers know this, and they've seen that these secondary perils, as they're referred to, have increased significantly in recent years. And this chart shows why. As we sort of showed earlier, the number of storm events has really ramped up, in the last 20 years or so. But there's certain interesting characteristics that we find interesting. And if you look at the boxes on the right, in the top chart, while the number of events has gone up, the average cost of the events has stayed about the same. And if you look again at the composition of the losses, 60% of the severe storm events, create losses under $2 billion. And in this category, there have only been 4 severe storms in this period that have created over $10 billion losses. And you can see those listed on the bottom. There was a severe weather back in 1995. More importantly, there were 2 hurricanes within 2 weeks of one another. 2 storms in 2011 within 2 weeks of one another that caused significant losses. So the characteristics of these losses is sort of interesting to watch. The other thing that's interesting with the severe storms is while the number of events that create billion-dollar loss has been going up, the underlying events themselves have not been going up. And you can see this in the chart. The hail events and the tornadoes have roughly been the same. You're just only modest growth, certainly not as much growth as the billion-dollar events. And the reason, quite simply, and this is important to think about, particularly if you're an insurance company, people are just moving into harm's way. There are more people in the higher risk areas. So it's an interesting characteristic. The number of big loss events is going up, but the events themselves are not increasing. And in one final chart we look at, I think it's interesting to look at the wildfire losses. I mean, as you know, this is a Western issue, and then mainly it's a California issue. California accounts for 68% of all the wildfire losses. But again, if we go back and look at it on a per capita basis, California only ranks 4th, and Montana ranks the highest on a per capita basis. And now Hawaii is 4th among the top 10 states, but only because it's only had one fire on this list, and that was last year's Maui fire, which was fairly significant. So that's what I wanted to show you, just as a closing thought. We find this information to be really insightful in terms of understanding the trends in disasters, and we have a lot more information from the NCEI database. Feel free to reach out if you'd like to see some of the spreadsheets. And thank you for listening.